Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Consider this a bonus episode. First episode back of the new season. It was extra long. This is a very layered case. There is a lot going on, and has been for quite some time. This show will continue on a bi-weekly schedule. Live show Thursday, October 10th at Off Cabot in Beverly, Massachusetts. Come out if you can. There will be more live shows to come. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. New this week, Merrill, and Solid Gold Kate M. Our Superstar EP, Lisa McColgan. Happy birthday. I have a monthly mini on the way for September. Real life Jaws, if you will. You can support the show. 4 tiers starting at $1. Patreon.com/crime of the truest kind. I appreciate each and every show of support, whether it's just following, sharing something online. Everything makes a big difference. 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It's a one-woman operation here, my friends. This is episode 70. I continue my conversation with Susanne Cleveland, an advocate and part of the Justice for Sandra Birchmore Facebook group. It is a movement. They have been working hard to keep her case in the public eye. Episode 70, hunker down with me in Stoughton, Massachusetts. An internal investigation is conducted within the Stoughton Police Department beginning in 2021, shortly after the death of Sandra Birchmore. The findings were released in a 60-page report in September of 2022 that found 3 Stoughton officers had acted improperly. Language in the report included things like failing to demonstrate attention and devotion to duty, incompetence, failure to demonstrate sound judgment, all behaviors considered unbecoming of a police officer sworn to serve and protect. Upon release of the report, Stoughton Police Chief Donna McNamara said the information was deeply troubling as a human being and a police chief. Named were former cops Matthew Farwell, William Farwell, and Robert C. Devine. Now Devine, you will hear, also had a sex and lies scandal, probably some videotape too, where he was framing a woman he had had a sexual relationship with while he was married to somebody else. This goes back to 2015. He was accusing this woman of harassment when he was actually the harasser. He orchestrated all sorts of things to create phone calls and emails and messages, etc., to suggest that this woman was targeting he and his wife, when the whole time it was him. He was found out, but somehow he still managed to get his job back. What Sergeant McNamara called for upon the release of this report, referring to them as unfit to serve, and asked that the state's new Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission decertify them, which would bar them from working as police officers ever again. The Post Commission is a new board to oversee officers at each one of the state's 431 law enforcement agencies, identify and investigate corruption, and to decertify officers found guilty of misconduct, ranging from all sorts of things, including, but not limited to, sexual misconduct. Its first charge, writes the Boston Globe, is to evaluate a group of nearly 9,000 officers in person by July 1, a deadline established under the 2020 law, as part of a new recertification process. In addition to the Stoughton Police Department, Abington Police Department confirmed it was aware of alleged misconduct by one of its officers. That officer, you will find out, is Joshua Heel. After the release of this internal investigation, on December 29th, 2022, Sandra's family, or the Birchmore estate, filed a wrongful death lawsuit alleging wrongful death, negligence, negligent supervision, negligent retention, pain and suffering, and emotional distress, stating the years of grooming of Sandra, beginning when she was part of the Explorers program. Now, Matthew Farwell is being held and charged with Sandra's death, among other things. And as far as I can tell, William Farwell and Robert C. Devine are both continuing the post-commission hearings, all of whom have been decertified. And as I understand it, Devine, in particular, is fighting his decertification. It has everything to do with his pension. I continue my conversation with Susanne Cleveland. When I tell you we spoke for about 7 hours about Sandra Birchmore's story, that is no exaggeration. Please support crime of the truest kind, and there are a number of ways to do so. Listen to the show. Tell your friends about it. Share it on social media. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Go to the merch store. Buy some merch. Drop a tip in the jar. Give the dogs a bone. Really, my dogs are obsessed. Become a patron on Patreon, with 4 tiers starting at just $1. All links at crimeofthetruestkind.com.
In this case, we now know that he admitted to probably the worst of the worst already. I mean, it's documented, it's up on mass.gov that he committed statutory rape. Still nobody did anything about that. We'll circle back to that. But that was as a gesture to take energy and attention away from committing murder.
It's documented that he effectively resigned when this internal investigation was taking place. He clearly had no other choice but to leave the Stoughton Police Department.
Yes. And the only move is to raise holy hell by way of a civil trial. More power to them for doing that. We wouldn't be here with this broad sweeping motility happening right now. We wouldn't be here if not for that. Obviously, the FBI had a hand in that. Public outcry, attention, and pushback on, hey, we're not just writing this young woman's life off. We're not going quietly into that good night and just saying, oh, women get emotional. Sometimes they just impulsively decide that it's over, in spite of all this insurmountable evidence that monster did this to her.
Let's talk about that evidence. Let's talk about what ultimately led us to where we are today. It was the medical examiner ruled that it was a suicide with, okay, so surprise everyone, I'm not a doctor. Given the affidavit, when they break down pretty basic findings in that report about how Sandra was found, detailing the way she was sitting, the pressure, the way her necklace was broken, just this sort of play-by-play that the doctor goes through in evaluating the information post-autopsy through the medical examiner's office. Norfolk County, right?
Yes, Norfolk County.
Anybody worth their weight could have determined the fact that she would not have rested that way, that there was an impression of the strap, that she was staged. We know he tried to stage it to look like she took her own life. He failed because he doesn't even know how physics works and the state of the body and how her weight would fall and how things would actually appear if it was a legitimate suicide, as this person was banking on happening, that he would just sky through this and no one would ever bat an eye or ask another question about his
Well,
involvement.
he didn't have to be good at it. He had Fanning, and it's a pretty lengthy list of troopers and officers and that's a whole other episode, but in and out of that apartment. Hopefully we'll find out during the course of this ongoing case who maybe raised their hand and said, hey, you know what, I don't really think that that's how that happened. And then we'll find out who among them, including but not limited to John Fanning, said, no, this is how we're going to do this. This is how this is going to play out. Thanks for showing up, but why don't you go outside and guard the parking lot while we do our real police work? So going back to Fanning saying, Matthew Farwell's not a real detective. He couldn't pull off something like that. Well, what the fuck are you, Fanning?
The evidence shows
who is actually doing police work is who actually is, or is it a network of cover up and throwing away women's lives and chalking them up to being too crazy to exist, or too inhumane to be, or too much of an asset or a resource to these disgusting men to have any semblance of freedom and proper life?
It's astounding to me that when I read through the second half, the part 2 of the affidavit was far worse, because that's when you really get to the heart of what
It's the uptick. It's the uptick.
What was going on really in the mind and heart of Matthew Farwell when he was abusing this woman, and he had decided that she was an inconvenience because she wanted to have this baby, and he didn't want anything to do with it at that point because she was asking things of him. He was forcing her into things for years, and then tables were turning for him, and that control, that the aspect of him feeling like she had any leverage in the relationship. Sorry, not a relationship, in their association. I corrected myself because
their interactions.
It wasn't ever a relationship. Let's call it what it is. He did not like to feel like he was losing any quote unquote power or control in this association that they had been having for all of these years. And I'm going to say it, this motherfucker couldn't handle it. All of the damage that he had done to this young woman throughout the course of her adolescence into her early adult life, he didn't like it. So he made the decision that he was going to choose for her.
I would argue, and it's heartbreaking to say, but that decision was made. I was going through my vast pile of notes and looking for things that stood out in terms of timeline. When Sandra was sort of craving for this belonging and going into these programs, and was sort of bebopping into this after school activity for the Explorer program, she was interacting with Matthew Farwell. She was 12 years old when she got a friend request from Matthew Farwell to spend time together beyond a seemingly innocuous thing from somebody that you admire and look up to and want to be like. So that's where the decision was made. This launch of social media being an initiative to create more community interactions and belonging, I'm going to go ahead and say it, that was a Robert Devine joint. Devine was the one who spearheaded all of not only will we include everybody and make you all family, but we're going to use social media to make it even easier and quicker and more readily available 24/7. We're going to be there for you 24/7. That's what that looks like. And that is definitely able to be corroborated if you want to go in the Wayback Machine.
He was brought in to grow the program and to sort of beef it up. Wasn't that part of his role, or what his intent was?
He was responsible for the Explorers program for quite some time, yes. And then later on, as it started to overlap with Sandra getting involved with activities in the Explorer program, there was a stint that Robert Devine was on leave for a bit for some controversy that he went through. And then when he returned from his controversy and was demoted, he was ordered to really make the Explorer program launch into the stratosphere and become bigger and better than what it was. I don't know if I would regard it as sort of his penance for coming back and, being demoted to patrol. But whatever it was, whatever the assignment was, to me, it was sort of the launch of a supervillain. He's come back. He was able to at least rescue his career and get back in there, not as the second most powerful person in the department, but as a patrolman. And his gift in that was that he was going to take these public facing community initiatives and make them bigger and better, and take over the community. With regard to the explorers, it made it so that everybody in the community felt that they could bring their children there more and more.
Divine's, did you call it controversy? Something happened with him. Was it marriage related?
He had a relationship sort of spiral into a controversy that involved, this is an adult woman, so I think it's okay to say an affair. In that regard, at least there's that. It was an adult consensual person that got into this messy relationship and breakup. And Divine and his wife at some point or another both took out harassment protection orders on the, I guess we could say, bereaved former mistress.
The third party?
Yes, the non-cooperative thrown away woman. Don't want to speak for her either, but it all falls in the category of throwaway women. So this controversy erupted. It got very ugly, and it turned out that the protective order and the ensuing arrest of this woman was actually an elaborate lie. Robert Divine set her up.
Did they try to make her look like a crazy bitch, Susanne?
They've got a script for it. They've got it all laid out. See, here's the thing. Make somebody look like a crazy bitch, or actually escalatively turn them into one by sheer terror and by making a mess out of their whole life. I mean, imagine you go through this messy breakup, and you've got a guy in power who's saying, like, listen, if you're not just going to go off quietly, I'm going to make your life a living hell. And he did.
I call that a tyrant.
However it came to be that everybody ended up knowing about it, suddenly you've got the whole community and the weight of local and state law enforcement all involved, because instead of backing down and saying, okay, you know what, we're going to go ahead and adios the protective order and actually give this woman a break, and we're going to move on with our lives, he had her arrested, put her in jail, and then the IAA report speaks to it a little bit better than I can because it's very lengthy. But basically, people went into her apartment. I don't know who the people were. Took her tech. She came back from jail and reported that she had been her place had been broken into and robbed. And they said, "Oh no, that was just us investigating." And that was all in an batshit crazy bananas effort to try and contort her tech usage as being in a harassing manner.
Try to frame her for things that she didn't do.
Well, disseminating their, sketchy photos and messages. This man spent time spoofing phone calls over and over and over again as originating from her to show that he was being terrorized, and then his wife was being harassed and terrorized too. Turns out it was not true. But in the midst of that crazy making experience, she went to jail, had her life turned upside down, and had the weight of local and state law enforcement on her ass. That had to have been terrifying.
She had to pay a pretty big price for getting involved with this man.
Others have spoken with her, and nobody has permission to again, so I wouldn't think to do that. But changed her name, moved, lost her job, basically had to restart her life. But in the town, there was some backlash and people asking questions and saying, what are you going to do about this? This is out of control. And the outcome was really, well, it was a tough situation, got a little messy there, but it's really a private matter. So we're going to go ahead and bring him back in, bring him back down to patrolman, and we're all going to go back to normal. That's what the outcome was. Who in the world knows why? Because there was so much damage done, and he was cited as being an untruthful law enforcement professional. That was the outcome of his report. But I guess they didn't flinch at that. So they brought him back in. They brought him back in and then gave him the Explorer program to beef up and do better.
That was his task, to build this, make this more
I'm
successful.
sure among many things, but in my, I guess my point of view or my perspective, that's where the supervillain sort of hatched is, okay, I'm back here, but grudgingly as a patrolman and not the second in power. And now I'm in charge of the community and everybody's children.
Is it documented? Did he participate in sexual abuse of a child?
There's certainly reported documentation from a later time period when Sandra was an adult. And we'll leave that there because allegedly this is somebody who works as an attorney.
He left law enforcement and went to law school and now works as a defense attorney, right?
I guess retired and is contesting decertification to retain pension. And he is a lawyer. I find it interesting. If it wasn't known before, I've made it known that he swore into the bar on February 2nd, 2021.
Oh my. The day after Sandra Birchmore was killed.
The day after and 2 days before found. I don't know what to do with that piece of information. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it there. Day after she was killed. That's when he swore in. Yep.
Is there a fourth player in this that has been implicated, being involved in Sandra's case?
Certainly, Josh Heel has been a very big conversation piece. Yes, it is documented and admitted to that he engaged in misconduct with her. His is specific and limited to his stint as an animal control officer. The fallout of them investigating his interactions with her, which involves being in the animal control office and usage of the animal control space while on duty to engage in sexually inappropriate activity. That was a big deal and got him in a lot of trouble. He seems to have cooperated immensely and provided investigative material in order to save his ass, I guess would be the right way to say it. I don't really want to let anybody off the hook for behaving inappropriately with a person who is clearly, even if not a child, struggling immensely and going through abuse and confusion and exploitation by his buddies, and somehow being invited to exchange in some, I don't know the right way to say it. They were aware of each other's activities and he was aware of the extent of their activities, and Sandra trusted him and confided in him to actually express some of the horrors that Matthew Farwell was putting her through. And instead of saying, you know what, hey, hold the phone. Sounds like you're going through a rough time, kid. Maybe we should get you some support and help. That asshole decided that he would trade a cat for her to perform a sex act. I can't really let him off the hook for that, even though, investigatively he became less valuable at a certain point and he's off of the civil lawsuit.
Is he still participating as a law enforcement entity in some way?
Not really sure about that. He didn't get decertified. When he moved from animal control to go join the police force in Abington, he became an Abington police officer. They didn't really enjoy the look of the outcome of his internal investigation, so they let him go. So he left that job, but that doesn't mean that he's decertified. It doesn't mean that he can't, reinvent himself in another obscure place with another backstory, because they don't, if you cooperate to a certain degree, they don't just take away your ability to be a cop. The only thing, I can't conclusively say what Abington police decided, but they certainly decided that he wasn't a good look.
I'm on this page, crimetimelines.com.
Crime Timelines did an amazing job and continues to add to that timeline in a very prolific and accurate manner. Nothing's perfect. I'm sure that I'm not nailing it, but yes, it's very comprehensive, and it is as close to the piles of information that I have around, damn near memorizing, because it seems important.
It's incredible, and I've only spent small amount of time going through here, but there is the apartment complex video surveillance where Matthew Farwell is seen entering and exiting. There's information about the first autopsy report, the second autopsy report by Dr. Bodden, the third autopsy report by Dr. Smock. Her death certificate, it's incredibly thorough. An incredible amount of work and research and resources that are available to people to get a real idea or a real understanding of what's gone on.
Well, yeah, I mean, in case anybody is puzzled, in case anybody doesn't get it yet, in case anybody is confused, it's a really good resource. It's also a good resource to understand the problematic nature of a program such as Explorers. Not that everyone is like this. Angela, I'm losing grasp on what this sort of larger law enforcement nationwide Chiefs of Police of America, that organization, whatever that acronym is, I can't grasp it, but they have terminology and language that addresses the fact that they acknowledge that law enforcement in and of itself provides an opportunity for coercion and sexual misconduct to exist at a level that they don't have a grasp on. You couple that with the fact that the Explorer program adds yet another opportunity for coercive control and sexual misconduct, but
Predatory
with children.
behavior.
But with children.
The Explorer program was a nationwide program, is that correct?
It is. It might be a worldwide program, but I think whatever the version of it that exists here is an offshoot. I would say an abomination of Boy Scouts of America. Boy Scouts of America, like the Catholic Church, already had its scars, already had its marks on it. So the Explorers was born out of that program, more as a publicity. Change the look, change the language, clean it up. Let's make it into something different so that nobody gets hung up on the stigma of the Boy Scout title. But it doesn't mean that they necessarily changed how it operates.
It seems like on the surface, that goodwill gesture, right? That political thing, cops are shaking hands and kissing babies and all of the happy thoughts that people want to believe goes on in the inner workings of police forces. But over the last number of years, we've been able to pull that curtain aside to see some of the inner workings, and it is very grim.
Well, and I mean, and it should be, to your point, a safe space and a positive community atmosphere and a way to bring adults and children, together in a healthy, constructive way. But it requires oversight and management and regulation and rules, like you don't roll around one-on-one in a car with nobody else around, something that is repeatedly violated. There are aspects of it that, if unchecked, obviously run amok. That, again, that's a whole other episode, going over other example cases of Explorer programs in other states and regions that have gone nightmarishly awry. And we have those examples, but yet still here we are thinking everything's fine here, right? The child's not saying anything because they're really responsible for their own well-being, right? Going back to you saying this Arrested Development with Sandra, I mean, without wildly speculating, if the relationship with these men began at that onset at 12 years old, that's where the decision was made. That's where development was no longer possible as a thriving young woman enjoying life and going through the normal, hiccups and growing pains that adolescents should. And it's devastating to think that she didn't get to. I don't want to just throw this in there because it was one of those holy shit moments when I was reading the affidavit, that she didn't go to her prom because she was catering.
She was making herself available to this predator.
Yes. That's one of those devastating details that is just very difficult.
This is an honest feeling and this is not in any way, shape, or form blaming Sandra for anything that happened to her during her childhood, into her teen years, into her early adult years, and ultimately not responsible for what happened to her in the end. But I said Arrested Development, but she never was allowed or afforded the emotional growth that other people, other young women had in that period in their life.
But that doesn't mean that she didn't give it her level best. I mean, there was so much try and effort and tenacity. When you think about everything that she did with her way too short life and the amount of energy that she put into getting her education and in various jobs, she was a very hardworking, very smart girl who was constantly trying to better herself and was very caring to other people and involved in self-defense classes, loved animals. She did have something of a life outside of this. Of course she did. But imagine being somebody who works that hard and is plugging along trying to get an education, showing up for a school, I imagine probably early, 7:30, 8 in the morning, and giving love and energy and care to the students and everybody around her, as well as studying on almost no sleep, because after 8 hours, 9 hours of work, and then taking classes and trying to take care of yourself when you've got a growing baby, or you're just sort of grasping the reality of that situation, you're being kept awake and terrorized by a man and or men who want something from you.
They wanted her to be available at their beck and call.
Having read the reports, they went to great pains to show the pattern and the succession of this communication and the demand. It's really unspeakable. But think about that. You picture the daytime, the loving, the smiling, the happy, caring, there for everybody, Sandra, and having to switch gears into this nightmare that didn't seem like a nightmare to her. Yeah.
I see her as having actually an incredible level of success given the emotional roller coaster, some of the emotional things that she experienced. She lost loved ones in a rapid succession, 3 people that were really, really important to her. Yet she was working for the Sharon School District, clearly a very successful job, a very respectable job.
She was a teacher's assistant.
She had her own apartment. She had recently, within a few months' time, moved into the Canton apartment on her own. She was living there by herself.
Mm-hmm.
She was doing quite well. And she was planning, if she had not started nursing school yet, she was in the stages of whatever the prep was to get into nursing school.
She had plans. She had hopes and dreams. She was working hard towards them and was trying to carve out her place in the world by having a family after having lost those closest to her, and thinking, it's in the language that she uses. It's tough to go back to those messages because I see a lot of that communication being in a headspace of possibly trauma, and it doesn't exist as actualized trauma because she didn't get an opportunity to figure that out and address it and heal and move on from this ongoing abuse, because it never stopped. There wasn't any break from it. It working against, I guess we could say, mental and emotional, what's the name of the person with the rock? Prometheus. I always get that one wrong. Pushing that uphill and not just getting through the day to day, but being a functional person and being a caretaker and being devoted to your friends, being devoted to the children in your classroom. It's not like she was sleepwalking through life. She was giving it all the try imaginable, and also trying to get help, seeing somebody. And there is this sort of really delicate process of sussing out with somebody who's going through what Sandra was going through. You can't just go into a therapy session and say, hey, we're going to get you out of this. You have to get somebody to a part of some type of safety, or feeling that they're valuable enough to ask for help. And we had those forces working against that with her constantly.
And despite that,
you think you're going to be free. You think you're able to do what you want. You think you're going to get one up on me. Well, guess what? No, you're not.
And despite that, how her life ended is the saddest part of all, of course. But despite all of these challenges, she was doing remarkably well outside of that very traumatic associations she had with these men, I hope that she knew that she was doing well. I hope that she was proud and recognized that. I know that she was in therapy. I know that she was being treated she was on medication. I don't remember what she was using.
Oh, it was sertraline. It's an antidepressant. I can speak from experience on this, so I can say it safely. It's one that is probably deemed the most safe by an OBGYN. So you're on a maintenance plan for keeping yourself in check and you're in care, it's just, I call it putting that proverbial raincoat over the puddle so you can get over type of medication. So that demonstrated an effort to be well and stay well, and particularly for the new life that was developing. You saw that in the reports. She was taking care of herself, doing better, cutting coffee, changing her diet, very dedicated to making sure that this baby was healthy and that everything was going to be okay. And in that due process, maybe getting a little stronger, maybe getting a little bit more self-assured to say, you know what, maybe I can be okay without this asshole. Yeah, maybe you can do this or that, or watch me on FaceTime, open gifts with your child that you won't acknowledge. But she was choosing to do it on her own and was trying to find a way to do it.
I would like to think that had she been able to do that, because of the shifting emotions she would have had with that child, and it's tragic to say this because it's what will never be. I like to think of how someone's life would have become later. She would have, through having that baby that she wanted so very much, that she would have been able to get new or renewed strength to move on in her life away from this trauma and this abuse that she had.
Sometimes that's how that happens, is through motherhood. Is that again, speaking from personal experience, when my daughter came into the world and I was recovering from an unsafe situation, everything changed, everything shifted. This purpose, this other little person that you live for and with, brings you new meaning and strength that you never knew you imagined. Now, Sandra felt this meaning and purpose and love and rejuvenation very early on, which tells me that it was really powerful. Not everybody is in touch with their maternal energy that early on. She wanted it. And everybody knew. I mean, as far as her friends and family and loved ones who speak of her, they knew that it mattered to her and that she was trying to make a go of it and that she was very happy about having a baby. They were pushing back on these law enforcement agents, pushing back on the, wait, no, there's no way that she could have died by suicide. She wanted to be here. She wanted this baby. Can you guys maybe, I don't know, look under the hood a little bit more, maybe check out a few more things?
Yeah.
No. Just bitches just be like that. Nothing. They didn't even flinch. It breaks my heart to think that it just gets thrown under the rug of basically making it her fault that her life ended the way that it did.
That she is somehow responsible for that. And to speak to her having the baby and wanting very much to be a mother and the emotional reward and all of the things that would have come from it for her, how she was going to explain who fathered the baby, where's the father, if she must have been planning some sort of own way to explain to people.
To the point of those who were in her life, they were willing to embrace and support her. It did, which just adds to the devastation.
And they knew of this relationship for quite a while.
Some knew. Can't speak for them. I mean, you see it in some of the conversations that are documented, that they knew of the relationship and that they were maybe uneasy about the logistics of it, but there wasn't anything that pointed towards anyone being unsupportive. Everybody wanted what Sandra wanted. They wanted her to be safe and happy and healthy. And, damn it, if this is how it's going to be, then we're going to love you and this baby. There's a way to exist with that reality. There's a way to exist. And when your family or when your friends or your loved ones, and okay, it's an unusual, it's an unconventional situation, but this is about Sandra Birchmore and her baby. This isn't about like we'll figure out a way to work around the origin story. You at least are supposed to get to have the origin story of your own, separate from the nightmare. But that dichotomy of her being happy and being energetic and hardworking, no one could have known the depth of what was going on with these men, because that's part of the process. That's part of grooming and gaslighting and isolation and the torment of causing somebody like Sandra Birchmore to sort of be at their behest and figure out a way to lead this dual life where you do all the things. Don't let anybody know. You push it, you keep it a secret, and you're obligated to. I mean, the very definition of coercive control when it comes to physical relationships of this ilk is that there's a threatening and intimidation and a process that goes on that desensitizes to the horror that you're experiencing, so that when you're outwardly facing with everybody else, you don't talk about it. It normalizes it, and it's part of it. And early on,
Compartmentalize as well.
Compartmentalize, yes, which is scary. But to add to that, you're dealing with somebody with a gun. You're dealing with somebody who is in control, the safety and protection of the community. What could be more isolating than that? Is that if you do decide, hey, you know what, this doesn't feel safe to me, I want to get out of this, then the person you call is that guy. How do we cope with that reality? How do we cope with the fact that it's already enough that Sandra Birchmore lost her life to this nightmare, but that there could still be other victims who need to be brought to safety from the fallout of their situations, because at the very least they're still alive to do so. And that's something that needs to be embraced, and I guess we could say fortified, a safety net put around everybody to say, okay, we know what's going on, and it's okay to come forward and talk about it, because you've been through a lot of these case studies, so you know about the history of the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts, and the stark reality is that processing trauma and actually telling a story doesn't come for many, many years.
Legislative advocacy is so very important because, really, as I've learned, the average age of someone who has experienced sexual abuse or child sexual abuse in this case is 50 years of age. And the statute of limitations is usually, for a lot of these folks, closed, which is so incredibly unfair.
Well, and that's if you're alive. And that's if you haven't succumbed to years of substance abuse or, whatever other coping mechanisms are used to get through something like a normal life. There are a lot of variables to it. But she's, unfortunately, Sandra's not even here to have that option. But those who would have been in her time frame and in this program and under the care, I can't say care, of these men would be my daughter's age, would be, in their late 20s, late 20s, early 30s, if you're talking about the span of this program under these men. I would find it hard to believe that of the 300 that Robert Devine espouses to have gone through his program, that she's the only. We obviously know about Sandra's story, and we know of one other story that was told that was a sort of near miss, that this person struggles with tremendous survivor's guilt about, having a close call of this ilk. Those are only 2 stories out of the 300.
A couple of things. You're incredibly compassionate and empathetic about not just this case, but so many others, because we've had conversations. You are a driving force behind justice for Sandra Birchmore. I'm curious what your other conversations are like with other creators. Do they want to be as focused on Sandra and the person that she was and the things that she had accomplished?
I would answer it 2 ways. Some of those things, some of the nitty gritty, some of the details we sort of have to address, because otherwise the conversation is just one big parenthetical insert, and it's, there's no comprehension. So there's an extent of it that we need to know in order to get the magnitude and the gravity of the situation. But then there's a kind of hard stop about dwelling on or staying in the nightmare fuel aspect of it. And the nightmare fuel aspect of it also lends itself to questioning what Sandra could have done differently. And I'm going to spell this out hard and fast right now and say that if anybody has that question, they really need to think about the fact that in any of these situations where somebody whose life was destroyed, taken down, and inevitably ended, who suffered that kind of egregious abuse, the only one who's to blame, and in this case, the only ones to blame, are the predatory, abusive motherfuckers that did it. Not somebody who didn't understand how the process works, not a parent who is struggling with their own division of effort and actually thinking that their child was safe. That's not valuable to entertain that topic. But what I'm finding is that the other creators have been pretty open to learning about the terminology, about grooming, coercive control, and like, how did we get here? And let's talk about how to get these guys and let's help the public understand. And yeah, there's going to be some crime story in there. There's going to be some of that who's who, and was it Fanning and compared to Proctor. And you're going to have that because it's the only way to keep the attention in the room. But there is definitely a willingness to learn and understand so that we can actually garner some type of prevention and awareness in conjunction with justice for Sandra Birchmore.
Which is an incredibly important component to all of these conversations that we're having going forward. I do think about reading these documents, and I do think about how this trial is going to play out. You know, the fact of the matter is it's all laid out for us. Matthew Farwell, he was planning this in such a way that is so despicable. He asked Sandra for a key to her apartment.
They did discuss it at the onset of her getting the apartment, and he said basically, no, screw that. It's your thing. It's not mine. I don't want that. I don't want the possibility of getting caught. So he dismissed it. No, I'm all set. I'll let you know when I need something from you.
We're control again. What stood out to me among all of these very egregious things, as you have so eloquently laid out for us, is the premeditation in the code to the door of the apartment.
Yep.
He wanted the general code. To be absolutely frank, I didn't know there was a difference between a general code and a personal residence code. He did not want Sandra's personal code. He wanted the general code so he could somehow cover his ass that they'd never.
The traceability.
They'd never trace it.
traceability. These guys know about intricacies of these types of keypad programs and the what do you call that, the law enforcement one, the Avigilon system.
Yes.
Imagine something that is used as a tool for safety and having timestamps on things in order to protect evidence or to know where somebody is at any given time, to understand crimes being committed, but using it to kill a young pregnant woman who is, for whatever reason that we'll never understand, completely loyal and trusting and thinks that you want to be there for her.
She thought he was coming around, and meanwhile he was just casing her place and figuring out how he could try to make this the quote unquote perfect murder, because that's really what he was hoping for.
It's beyond betrayal. I don't know. I don't know if there's a
it's evil. Quite frankly, it's evil to me.
Yeah, there aren't really enough synonyms for evil that fit in this scenario. But if there were a million more synonyms for evil, I would give it to the guys who dismissively wrote this case off as just another suicidal, deceased, crazy, messy, pregnant young woman. How dare they? Honestly, how dare they?
Yes.
And at this point, the public, of course, we feel the way that we feel because we're embedded in this case. You know, our loved ones, family, supporters, people from the community who have been out there with signs saying, wait, what happened to our poor girl? You know, we have that. But now the general public is starting to go, I'm sorry, what the actual fuck were you guys doing in conjunction with arriving to the scene? And you're what?
Yes.
And when you think about the fact that the investigators and I don't want to create dividing lines between
Mhm.
those who are complicit because they simply don't know what's going on. And because, like I said, at the crime scene where the guy in charge comes in, he's already on the phone with the DA's office, already spinning the wheels, and says, "Go guard the hallway," to the guys who are first on scene. I don't know how to suss out, which ones are the ones who are just, okay, well, we really can't buck up against the administration or the powers that be because we don't want to lose our jobs or be retaliated against or put through some type of threat, or just are clueless. Perhaps there is an element of ineptitude and cluelessness, but I don't want to let any of you off the hook. If any of you were nearby, adjacent to, or even marginally thought differently about how that scene played out, there's got to be a devotion to duty to expose that and to put this to an end, including the two other bad guys that are still very much out there. That's very unsettling to me that
Mhm.
they're still out there. Anybody who is close enough to, I mean, okay, so we've got Matthew Farwell. That's a start. I believe it was Sandra's cousin who said in an interview with Channel 10 News, said that the arc of justice is finally starting to curve towards or slant towards Sandra. And it
Yeah,
was just such a poetic way to say
that's
it.
a beautiful thing to say.
And there was more to it. I just don't want to get it. I don't want to bungle it. But that arc of justice leaning towards, okay, but we're not done by a mile, because anybody who even bungled part of it and allowed this to continue for 3.5 years, y'all need to check yourselves and figure your shit out real quick.
We think that the Karen Reed case, so we had a mistrial, and I called that, unfortunately. I saw that coming. Anybody who's listened to this show and in anything that I've said about Karen Reed, I never got involved in the case as deeply as so many other people did. I wanted to see the right thing happen. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if we're ever going to find out really what happened to John O'Keefe on that night.
Which is devastating too. I
Yeah,
mean,
it
there's no
truly,
justice for John O'Keefe if we don't
truly,
figure out the
truly.
exact things that happened on that night. I don't mean to butt in on that, but it's really important that people know that whatever your misgivings are about the Karen Reed trial or that
Mhm,
situation,
mhm.
whether guilty or innocent, whatever your opinion is, it's more important to know how egregiously they fucked up that investigation and how much they betrayed both parties, all parties involved, because of the fact that they didn't do their job. So whether she did or didn't, it's relevant. Of course it's relevant, but that's why we have a justice system, so that you actually do the work, so that you build the case, so that you get the bad guy or girl and you make it right
We
by
should be able
doing
to
the
prove
work.
it. We should
By
be able to
doing the
prove it
work.
one way or the other.
Yes, you should be able to prove
Yeah,
it. And now
yeah.
here we have, in stark contrast to that, in Sandra Birchmore's case, an absurd amount of evidence pointing towards a litany of terrible criminal behavior in
Mhm.
this case, and ultimately her murder, and they still didn't do their jobs.
I made reference to the Reed trial to say you thought that was huge. I can see this case, Farwell, and if other people are implicated, whether they
Former agents, former law
whether
enforcement
whether
agents.
they're arrested, whether they're charged, whether they're tried, whether they're convicted isn't up for us to say yet. I mean, time will certainly tell. But I do believe that this case will be, and I'm not saying this gleefully, it will be huge because of the nature of the case, because it is a murder. It's a young woman who was the victim of abuse at the hands of police officers for years. And because people's interest, we're human beings, the general nature of our curiosity when it comes to things like this, it will be very big. And I really hope, if we haven't learned anything, we begin to learn something as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have no control over what happens anywhere else in any other state in the country, but we really have to look at what's happening in Massachusetts in the offices of the attorneys general and law enforcement. It starts at the top, comes all the way down. We really need to find out. And
Well, and
who
to your
else?
point about we have the, the Commonwealth to deal with. Well, apparently we couldn't and we didn't because the FBI and Josh Levy had to step in and say, okay, y'all move aside because you done fucked up, like
Yeah.
you just said.
Yeah.
And not only that, like you could see it in, I realize that it's not my purview to speak towards, law enforcement on that level, but you could see it in his face,
Mm.
the level of anguish about how egregiously they offensively dropped the ball in pursuing Matthew Farwell at the very least. And you could see it in his face. We're not quite done yet. We still have a lot more to do here, but he can't speak to that because you can only speak with what you have concretely dropping in that indictment. And man, did he drop it with a sonic boom, including flashbangs in order to get him out of his dump truck, which is, I don't think I've ever experienced that in watching a case like this unfold in my time in Massachusetts. Have you seen
No,
something like that?
I cannot say that I have. And to see how that played out like that is a bit terrifying. The case has warranted that. It's terrible that it took that long.
In other cases where we didn't quite have the knowledge that we did, when you see the bells and whistles of the SWAT team and all that, all that insanity unfold, you think, is it over the top? Was that for show? Was that for optics? In this case, you understand what a horror of a human being he really was. He's still alive. He is. But the level of danger and the level of planning that they had to incur in order to safely apprehend him. So Josh Levy was very clear about the fact that it was relatively new to them for them to come in as they did, but they still had to pick the day, had to pick the environment, had to, in broad daylight in a crowded parking lot, orchestrate an arrest like that because of how dangerous this man was. I'll say he's not as dangerous because he's in a cage right now.
They had to be privy to information about the likelihood of this guy opening fire.
There doesn't seem to be any limit. I say it in this, hyperbolic way, all the king's horses and all the king's men, because of how dramatic that was. And it's harrowing to see that it had to go down like that. But you know how it wouldn't have had to go down like that is if you did your fucking jobs in the first place at that moment, at that time.
When did the internal it's in front of me, but
So
I don't have.
the internal investigation dropped September 2022. That's
Yeah.
when it was announced that they had exacted out the problem that led to Sandra Birchmore's suicide.
He's
And that's
responsible for what she did to herself. Wrong. He did it to her.
so we're still in the realm of the power of the Karen Reed case. We're still back in that
Yeah.
wheelhouse of the framing, blaming, and shaming of women.
Mhm.
And that is a huge problem. So framing one woman, okay, at least she's alive, has a team to fight for herself, and as well she should. That's what everybody has a right to do. But this goes to the point of framing for being responsible for her own death. Again, just framing, blaming, shaming of women. It seems to be the mantra of this DA's office, at least, and certainly these law enforcement professionals associated with this case, because not one has sat apart and said, "Hey, wait a minute, guys, this doesn't look right." They had a loved one say, "What about this necklace?" They had a loved one say, "What about this necklace?"
And they're like, huh?
I mean, it's messy here. The cats are running around. It's she went crazy.
So disconcerting to know that this has been, as you say, 3.5 years of hoping, waiting, anticipating. Will it happen? And here we are. I mean, we've got a long way to go. And I really want to know, this is an honest question to anybody, who are the people who are serving and protecting? Because we're not getting it's not a good look. You're not fostering a lot of faith and trust in the police force.
I do want to address that because this obviously is coming up a lot recently, but these quote unquote men did what they did and pulled the wool over the eyes of an entire community, I would argue that they abused the entire community.
Mhm.
Although our focus is on what they did to Sandra Birchmore and her baby, they still took advantage of and abused and betrayed the safety and trust of their entire community in doing so.
Mhm.
The collateral damage and the ripple effect and we could just call it trauma of everybody who is adjacent to her story or wants to feel safe where they live and feel safe sending their children to local programs. I mean, we don't have this one anymore, but that's a lot. That's a lot for everybody to process. I did ask this question of a town official recently. What are you doing to help your community heal? Or what are you doing to assure your community and the parents and the children within it now? It's not that it's not important how you're assuring the legacy and the honor of Sandra Birchmore's life to her family. Of course it is. But what about everybody else? What are you doing to shore up this obviously broken system in your town? Because how could it not be? And that's a really big question that couldn't be answered. I'll just leave that there. But I also broached the question of, so you have the rest of the law enforcement agency who is the ones who are honorable and wanted to do the right thing and actually couldn't prevent this from happening and are maybe suffering through. I don't know what the version of survivor's guilt is exactly with law enforcement officials, but it's kind of a separate issue. But the dissension in the ranks and that unsettled feeling amongst them can't be good for their mental health.
No.
How do they feel safe to actually go about the business of protecting and serving if these guys were still there looking over their shoulder, facing whether or not to confront about their misdeeds and facing either imminent danger or retaliation or discipline by their superiors? Because you can't do that and get it wrong. It's important to know that you can't do it and get it wrong. And you maybe can't do it because somebody is stopping you from doing so, but still have to try and protect and serve under terrifying circumstances.
Mhm.
That can't be good for the safety of the officers involved. And it's going to take a lot of, I think, I feel like someone else should know this better than I would. A lot of work and effort and intervention from outside professionals, maybe other agencies, maybe some kind of psychological support to
I mean,
bring these officers back so that they can heal and protect and serve. I don't know, the fear of I don't even know what the fear looks like.
there's so many implications for me. We can look at, the last several years about police misconduct and defunding and all of these things. I want to call the police in my local neighborhood and I want them to help me. And I want to feel like they want to help me. And at the very same time, what has happened with Stoughton Police Department, because this is all on their watch. And I don't know if they have done this, but they should have come out with a statement and a plan to counter this horrible, unlawful, illegal, felonious, embarrassing situation that happens with a plan in place saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get mental health. We're going to address this head on. We're going to say no more. I don't know that they've ever done that.
Aside from this situation with these three, they're three brothers. Awful as it is to have to say it in that context, they were part of this force together. That can't be easy to overcome. And I mean, our job as civilians in trying to heal and incur justice for Sandra Birchmore doesn't concern with them getting better, but it should be for their chief. It should be for town managers to figure out how to fix their broken police force.
They
It
should
should be.
want to change the perception of law enforcement in every town, city, state. Collectively, they should all want to change that perception because we've been struggling with this by ourselves, Boston and the Commonwealth. But looking at Boston, all the ridiculousness with the crooked cops in Boston and the FBI letting Whitey Bulger murder people at will. I mean, we have a bad, bad history.
We do have a bad history. And you know what? The thing of Hollywood movies and almost like folklore to me, as dismissive it is to say that, until it was the throwing away of women and the callousness and the dismissiveness with which there's no real effort to find justice for a woman, the victim. It seems like a really high bar to get from that to where you're referring to. It got really, really bad. And it's not that I wasn't paying attention when it was, drugs and racketeering and all of that. Of course. But the image of poor Sandra and the promise of her young life being taken and how they handled it, that's not going to go away anytime soon for me.
No.
But the only thing that can be done is to push back on it and say, you know what, we're not accepting this. We're not going to deal with this shit anymore. You all need to change this. And it is working. I don't know if that's the right word for it. There's starting to be a chain of events that they can't look away from us, and they can't look away from the picture of Sandra that we're holding up as they go to their events. Another fundraiser to celebrate the career of the DA who has allowed this to happen under his watch.
It's that kind of predatory behavior of the throwaways, which I don't look at anybody as a throwaway, but it's that predatory behavior that has been a part of the grooming that we know about. The criminal mindset where they go after these people that they feel like nobody cares about. If I kill a sex worker, no one's going to care, which is untrue.
They're also going for somebody who is caring and vulnerable just in a way of admiration, and maybe looking for a breach in the system, a death or a tragedy that makes somebody actually entrust in their care to deal with the shock factor and the nitty gritty of those insidious details. It's more to understand, pay attention to that stark contrast between the outward facing person for whom it's really, really important to be alone with your children, one, and two, anything in the behavior that might be shifting that seems like it's can't be explained.
I'm sure this is a resounding thing among all of the folks and the support and the advocates that are part of Justice for Sandra Birchmore is no more, not one more. And you cannot look away from what we know happened to this young woman and by whom. This is a great deal of emotional labor for you. I hope that you find comfort and camaraderie among the supporters that you have been working with so very closely throughout this case has gone on for a number of years. And I know that you've developed some really strong relationships and bonds with these people. I want all of you to know how important that this really is, that advocacy work like this work that you're doing and the advocacy that I'm learning, they say that, why do you do it? It's compassion and empathy, but it's rewarding to make a difference, even if it is just a small one. And it's being the voice for somebody who no longer has a voice.
Through service, there is healing. That's the nature of the biz, so to speak. The biz that doesn't in any way pay, but pays in knowing, that pays in knowing that maybe somebody is feeling like a little bit comforted and maybe a little bit safer because you're saying, hey, we're not going to let this go. We're going to help you.
Because of the nature of true crime, and that, there's an interest, and there are a lot of crimes, unfortunately. But I want to make sure that I am on the good side of this, that I am one of those people that is part of delivering that message that there is good that can come out of something so terrible. And yes, there will be the people who want the dirt and the nitty gritty and break down every single thing that happened and play by plays and all of those things. And unfortunately, that's never going to go away as long as this is a viable medium for people to decipher all of this and take it. I truly believe we can use the powers of true crime for good, and you're a wonderful example of that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm humbled. I'm humbled by that. But empathic true crime is distinct from the greater, I guess, the world of true crime. Empathic true crime is its kind of own entity, I feel. um,
Yeah.
and it is a labor of love, a weird labor of love. But here we are, you know.
You really have truly been extraordinary. And I know that people recognize that. And I just want to thank you for spending so much time with me. We can't just be apathetic human beings that just go day to day and not care about anything. That's not the way we should be. That's not humanity.
No, and we can make it a little softer, like less agonizing for somebody who is trying to understand this case.
Mhm.
That's what makes the conversations last longer, is trying to find a delivery that someone can live with in a situation that is unlivable, towards the common goal of healing and prevention and awareness, and in honoring Sandra Birchmore's life.
Thank you so much, Susanne Cleveland of Justice, for Sandra Birchmore. There is a website. There is a Facebook group, Justice for Sandra Birchmore. I posted all the links in the show notes at Crime of the Truest Kind on the episode page. That also includes resources to help and support for you or anyone you know that might be experiencing abuse of any kind. And those very long investigative reports, like the internal investigation, 60 pages, and the 45-page indictment of Matthew Farwell, all there. This story will continue for quite some time. Matthew Farwell will face a judge and jury. My guess is sometime in 2025. It remains to be seen what happens with these other players. They have been publicly named as participants, at the very least, in the abuse of Sandra Birchmore. Thank you for listening. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. Massachusetts and New England crime stories, a little bit of history, minimal snark, sometimes some swear words. If you have a case you want to tell me about, email at crimeofthetruestkind@gmail.com. I have a number of interviews that I have done for future episodes. I am scheduling additional episodes. If there's something you want me to know about or someone you think that I should speak to, please reach out. Next live show, Thursday, October 10th, North Shore Crime Cases by request at Off Cabot in Beverly, Massachusetts. Tickets are on sale, linked at crimeofthetruestkind.com, also linked on all my social pages and my link tree. There's a lot of linkage that goes on with operating a podcast. I'll tell you that. You've asked me about doing crime trivia. I will work that into the show on the 10th in a respectful way. It's possible. And we will do a Q&A because there are other cases that you want to talk about, and I will oblige. Otis says hi. All the doggy kids say hello. I must be going. Lock your goddamn doors.